Hey, what is up guys? MurganMan4 here, and today I want to be giving you my final thoughts on the controversial Series 11. So Series 11 aired about 6 months ago, and so I thought it would be an ideal time to go back, look at the episodes again, watch them all in a pretty close together, so that I could get a sense of the series as a whole. And now that the newness factor has kind of gone away, I can be a bit more objective in how I look at the episodes. So as previously mentioned, Series 11 was very controversial, to say the least. A lot of fans did not like it. I quite enjoyed it for the most part, honestly, and rewatching it, I probably enjoyed pretty much every episode at least about the same, if not more, which is not quite the same thing that happened with Series 10, which I would honestly consider to be one of my favorite seasons of the show. But there were some episodes in Season 10 that I distinctly enjoyed a lot less than I had upon initial broadcast. But I can't say the same about Series 11. Almost every single episode, even if it wasn't enough to change my score, and actually surprisingly not very many episodes had their scores changed this time around. But pretty much all of them I at least appreciated a little bit more than I had upon the first time I watched them. And I should mention that I have not seen any of these episodes since they first aired. I may have seen like rewatch clips and stuff, but the last time I watched any of these episodes was the day after their initial broadcast, because I always watched them twice when they first aired. But yeah, so it's I mean, because I'm so involved with Doctor Who, I wouldn't say it's coming into it fresh. Because, you know, this is kind of constantly on my mind, but it is a bit of a new outlook on these episodes for the most part. So, yeah, I guess basically, let's get right into it. I'll talk about each of the episodes briefly, what I thought about them, and if my opinions changed at all about them. And of course, where else to start but the premiere, The Woman Who Fell to Earth. This episode is one of my favorite episodes of the season. I think it's a great opener, of the new series at least. It's still behind Moffat's openers for the most part, but I think I'd put it higher than all of RTD's series openers. And of Doctor debuts, I would put it below Matt Smith's and Peter Capaldi's, but above Christopher Eccleston's and David Tennant's. And so I think it's a great introduction to not just 13, but also all her companions. I don't think Series 11 ever really justified having 3 of them, but I did think this was a good introduction to all 3 of them. And I like all of them. Even though I would say, other than Graham, I'm not really attached to any of them, they're still all likable. Like, I don't dislike any of our main cast this season. Of course, this episode also has Grace. She's a fantastic character, so much fun, and so full of life, and it's on the one hand, it's a shame to have her killed off, because she would have been the perfect companion. On the other hand, her death is really effective, and it does send some ripples throughout the rest of the season that I think work really well, and give some great emotional beats throughout the season. And I also think it's somewhat necessary for Ryan and Graham's developing relationship, which is another aspect of the season that I personally really enjoyed. I also like Tim Shaw as a villain. I know a lot of people aren't huge fans of him, but I thought he worked really well in this episode. And going into it the first time, I had no idea what the villain of the episode was going to be, so that was a great feeling. But of course, you know, this time I'm well acquainted with him, and I still think he was pretty effective. There's some great build-up to his appearance and what he actually looks like, and I think the reveal works really well. And he's a good, credible threat, and actually Grace's death helps solidify that. But yeah, I really enjoyed The Woman Who Fell to Earth. All the times I've seen it, I would give it an 8 out of 10. Same score as I gave it before. But yeah, really good introduction. Next up we have The Ghost Monument, which I am definitely less keen on. I remember at this point in the series, people were still like really optimistic about it and really positive about it. I don't think it was until episode 4, Arachnids in the UK, that people really started being negative towards it. So when this episode first aired, I felt kind of in the minority because I wasn't a huge fan of it. I'm still not. It's currently my second least favorite episode of the season. But oddly, when I think about it, I don't understand my feelings about this episode because I definitely have a lot more complaints than compliments towards it. And when I think about this episode, I mostly think about the negatives. And yet, at the same time, I find myself still enjoying it. And when I compare it to other episodes, because that's what I do to help me find where I would score an episode, I compare it to what I've given other episodes. There are a lot of episodes that I compare it to and say I like this episode more, but I have a lot of complaints about it. The Doctor uses the sonic screwdriver way too much. I cannot remember another time where I've noticed it so much that I actually actively kept count of it, and it worked out to something like once every 5 minutes or something, which is just ridiculous. The sniper bots are just really lame. They're terrible. They don't really present any threat whatsoever. The planet, we're told all sorts of deadly things about it, but we never see any of its effects, which is massively disappointing and really lowers down the threat level of it. Of the positives, I will say visually it is really gorgeous. It's very well shot. From a production standpoint, it's a good episode. I also do like our guest characters, although another of my big complaints is that they seem to be kind of useless, really. They're supposed to be the final survivors of this race that started out with 4,000 contestants, and yet I can't think of a single time where it was one of them that solved the problem to help progress the plot. It was always the Doctor or one of her companions. Another thing I wasn't a fan of either was near the end when the TARDIS hasn't reappeared, the Ghost Monument. The Doctor just suddenly completely gives up hope as soon as they arrive there. But she knows that it's phasing in and out of time and only shows up every once in a while. Why does she automatically assume that they've missed it? And why is she so defeatist? Especially since this incarnation especially seems to be so built on hope and optimism and positivity. She's probably the most hopeful Doctor there is. And I know a lot of that hadn't been built by this point, but it just seems so out of character for her. And then all the companions are all the optimistic and hopeful ones, which really felt weird because they've just been sucked into this lifestyle. They've just met the Doctor. This is their first alien planet, and they're going through all this crazy stuff, and yet they're really optimistic. But they haven't even been in the TARDIS yet, so they don't even know what it can do. So I just found that really awkward. And of course, as I'm talking about this, the more negative things I think of. Another thing too is I found the companions' reactions to being on the first alien planet, as well as their reactions to the TARDIS being bigger on the inside and stuff. I found both of those reactions to be severely underwhelming. But yeah, as I mentioned, for some reason, despite having all those complaints, I still find myself enjoying this episode a lot more than many other episodes. And for me, at least, enjoyment is probably the biggest factor in how I score an episode. It doesn't matter how many flaws it has. If I'm looking at 2 episodes and I know for sure that I like one episode over the other, I'm going to give it at least the same score. I'm not going to give it a lower score, even if I know for sure it's critically worse. So there are definitely a lot other episodes that this episode would be critically worse than, but for some reason, it just doesn't feel right for me to place it lower than a 6 out of 10. That's just what my gut feeling tells me it should go at. So that's where I'm placing it, but it probably says something that I don't even know why I'm placing it that high. Episode 3 is Rosa, our first historical of the season. I love the historicals. I'm so glad that Chibnall is bringing the show back to its more historical roots and the educational roots. I love when the show is teaching you things and showing us real events from history with real people. One of the biggest disappointments for me out of the Peter Capaldi era was that we never met a historical figure throughout his entire era. So I'm really glad that Chibnall's brought that back, and the first one of this season is Rosa Parks. I find this to be a really tense, emotional, gripping episode. I love it. I love the setting. It's realized really well. And the scene on the bus near the end, when it turns out Graham's the one who Rosa refuses to stand up for, oh, that hits you so hard. Probably the weakest thing in the episode is the villain, Krasko, because he doesn't have a lot of depth to him. But he's still fine, and I really like the concept of him being a kind of a time meddler of sorts, and the Doctor and her companions have to do everything that they can to keep time in place. It's an interesting challenge, though surprisingly we don't actually see too often in Doctor Who. But yeah, really enjoy this episode, and I'll give it an 8 out of 10. Episode 4, Arachnids in the UK. As I previously mentioned, this is the one that really seemed to start the hate bandwagon for Series 11. And upon initial broadcast, I actually really enjoyed it. The second time I watched it, I liked it even more than I first saw it. This time around, it's weird because I wouldn't say that I enjoyed it less than before, but I think I recognize its critical flaws a lot more, and I think that does affect. I think its flaws bother me more than they did before. I still don't think it's anywhere near like the worst episode ever, which a lot of people call this one and the next episode. I don't think it's anywhere near there. I still think it's a pretty fun episode. The spiders are well realized, and they do provide a creepy threat. I do think Chris Noth's performance is a lot of fun, even if his character is written way over the top and is a really, honestly terrible stereotype, and is a very obvious Trump stand-in, which at times can be grating, but I think the performance is really enjoyable. And I'm not a fan of the ending at all. Even upon first broadcast, this is something that has bothered me since I first saw it. They seemingly just leave the spiders to die in the safe room. They don't do anything to try and help them, especially what feels so jarring after the Doctor says they deserve like a humane death, like we shouldn't shoot them, even though shooting them would be way more humane than leaving them just to starve to death or eat each other. So here's the thing. I mean, you could say that, you know, they got rescued or they had a plan in place to turn them back to normal size or something. But the problem is they didn't say that. They don't even hint at it. The last thing you hear about the spiders is that they're trapped in that room. That's it. So, even though you could assume that something else happens after that, you have to go by what the episode tells you. And since the episode doesn't tell you any further information, that's what you got to assume. And otherwise, you're verging into fan fiction territory. And of course, if you have to do fan fiction to solve something you don't like, I don't think you can give that towards the episode. If the episode doesn't provide a potential solution within it, and you can't draw the solution from what you get out of the episode, you gotta put it against the episode. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely got its flaws, but I still think it's pretty enjoyable for the most part still. And honestly, I think it's relatively harmless, maybe some stereotypical Trump stuff aside. So I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. And I should note that this is the first episode of the series that my score has actually changed. It's gone down 1.5 from the 7.5 I gave it upon my initial review. Next up is the Saranga Conundrum. We're now at the halfway point of the series, and this is yet another episode that tons of people say is like the worst episode of the show ever. And again, I'm just kind of baffled by that. I don't really get it. It's far from great. I wouldn't even say it's necessarily good, but it doesn't really do anything bad, honestly. It's probably one of the definitive meh episodes that you could have. One of those episodes that doesn't really do anything particularly good, but doesn't do anything particularly bad either. I will say, upon initial broadcast, this episode did something that I have never, at least I can never recall experiencing with an episode before. At least since Series 8, I watch each episode twice upon initial broadcast, as I've mentioned. But this is the first time since I can remember starting doing that I had no desire to see the episode again. It wasn't like an I don't want to watch the episode again because I don't like it. It's not that I would complain about watching it again. It's just a feeling of I don't feel like I can get anything else out of it. And even among bad episodes, a lot of the time you can at least pick some other stuff out of it upon a rewatch. You can maybe gain a little bit more appreciation for it, or could potentially go the other way, you end up disliking it more. But I don't know, this episode just left me feeling nothing really. And honestly, that feeling is about the same this time around. I do think it's still entertaining enough. Like, I wouldn't say I was bored during it. It just doesn't give me any reason to ever go back to it. And for that reason, I'm going to give it a 5.5. The extra 0.5 is because it is still entertaining. It does give me something. It's not like a straight up, completely nothing episode, but it does get close. Finally. We're at probably the peak of the series. What everyone seems to agree on is that the guest writers have done a much better job in Series 11 than Chris Chibnall did. Even I, as a supporter of Series 11, agree with that. Up to this point, we've only had one episode that has a guest writer. That was Rosa, but that was only co-written by Mallory Blackman. Every other episode, up to this point, has had a writing credit from Chris Chibnall, and 4 of them were solely written by Chris Chibnall. This is our first episode of the season to not have a writing credit by Chris Chibnall. It's Demons of the Punjab, and I think it's a really powerful adventure. It's another historical. It's set in the partition of India, and it's just a very emotional story about family and what makes us who we are, what is important about us, what defines us, and what tears us apart. And I think it's absolutely fascinating and filled with emotional moments and gut-wrenching story beats, and it's just a beautiful episode. Really, my only problem with it is you have these aliens in it. And honestly, I know a lot of people like that it had the aliens in it, but to me, they just feel like they were added in there for the sake of having an alien and not because they were necessary for the story, because ultimately they don't even affect the story in any way. To me, at least, they provide an interesting mystery at first, but there's this twist that they're not actually bad guys. They're just observers who honor the dead, but to me, that doesn't work as a twist because it ultimately makes them useless to the story. Thematically, they do matter, but to me, they just don't add anything. They should have either gone down the road of keeping them as bad guys so that the things that they were influencing in the plot earlier actually had an effect on some of the events, or they should have just not been included at all, which would have been my preference. I would have loved if this was a pure historical, because every time they popped up, mainly after the reveal that they were good guys, it just pulled me right out of the episode and right out of the emotion of what was going on. And I just wish that they weren't there so I could focus on what I actually cared about. So that's a bit of a shame. And honestly, I think if it weren't for them, this episode would be just fantastic. It would definitely be a lot higher up than it is. Even so, upon rewatching it this time, I did appreciate it just a little bit more, and I've decided to up my score from a 7.5 to an 8 out of 10. Next up we have Kerblam, which is probably the most traditional Doctor Who adventure of the season. It's got a great mystery, a fantastic setting in Kerblam. The robots are really creepy, the characters are all really well fleshed out and well acted, and this episode is just so much fun. It keeps you guessing. There's a lot of clever little details in there that you might not notice first time around, but they're good little clues that hint to the reality of the mystery and the situation that's going on. It's just a really well constructed episode. And I also want to note that this is probably the episode that utilizes the 3 companions the best. Watching it this time, when it first aired, I said it justified having 3 companions. Watching it now, I'm not quite sure I would go that far, but it's definitely still the one that utilizes the 3 companions the best. And it definitely comes closest to justifying having 3 of them. But yeah, this episode is just great fun. It's really thrilling, and I really enjoy it. And I think it's an 8.5 out of 10. With the Witchfinders, we have our third and final historical of the season. And this one I would probably say is the weakest of the three. Interestingly, it's the darkest, being about the witch hunts, but it's also the lightest because it's the least serious of the three. It's got a lot of comedic moments to it. So it's a bit of a weird blend, but honestly, I think it works for the most part. Alan Cumming is a guest star as King James, and he is just fantastic. Definitely got to be the most fun guest star we've had in a really long time. He's hilarious, and I love his performance and the character's presence in the episode. And the witch hunts themselves, you really feel like the paranoia and the terror of they could just go after anyone, because you know that there's no real witches, but anyone could be accused of it, anyone could be killed for it, and the paranoia feels real. Just like the previous two historicals though, I would say its weakest element is the monster. The Moraks are serviceable, but they don't really do anything. They're a lot less interesting than everything else that's in the episode before it, and it's kind of a shame that they pretty much take up the entirety of the last 5-10 minutes of the episode, because I really enjoyed the rest of it for the most part. This stuff kind of drags it down though. It's just less interesting, I think. And this is my case for pure historicals, because at least in the case of these three in Series 11, I just feel like the monsters, and I guess Krasko and Rosa, just have not been integrated as well. At least with Rosa, I did feel the justification for having Krasko there, but with Demons of the Punjab and the Witchfinders, I feel like both stories would have benefited without having those monsters in it, if it was just a pure historical focused on the events of the time. But, oh well, it is what it is, and it's still a thoroughly enjoyable adventure overall. I still really enjoy it, and I'm going to give it a 7.5 out of 10. It Takes You Away is another interesting case in that when I first watched it, it was one of my least favorite episodes of the season. And now it's climbed its way up to being one of my favorite episodes of the season. I think rewatches really help with this episode, and this is actually the only case of my score going up every time I've watched it. I think it's a really clever idea. I love the idea of the other universe that wants to be together with our universe but can't, and it's got a lot of twists and turns in it that I think work really well. When it first broadcast, there were two things that kind of bugged me. There was the twist that there wasn't really a monster, because I was looking forward to a really good classic monster adventure. But looking at it more in the context of the episode itself, I can see why they did that, and the twist is executed really well, and it definitely does benefit the episode. The other thing was the frog, when the universe takes on the form of the frog. At first I was just really incredulous of it, but now I've come to actually really love the ridiculousness of it and how it just embraces it. And to me that just feels so Doctor Who. I also love the all the stuff with Graham and Grace, with Graham trying to cope with his grief of losing Grace and having to realize that this isn't properly her and he can't be with her. And of course this episode also has Ryan finally call Graham Granddad, which is, it puts the biggest smile on my face every time I watch it. I love it. Probably my biggest issue with the episode is the anti-zone. It isn't necessary. It just kind of feels like filler. But this time watching it, I didn't mind it as much as when I first saw it. I thought it was fine. It provided some decent fun and an interesting character in Ribbons, that's for sure. So I don't really mind it that much. But yeah, the rest of the episode around that is pretty stellar. The anti-zone stuff is really mainly what's holding it back, but even that's still pretty decent. But yeah, I'm going to be giving It Takes You Away an 8.5 out of 10, which is half a mark higher than I gave it initially. And finally, the finale, the Battle of Ranskorav Kolos. A lot of people have found this to be a really underwhelming finale, and really don't like it. I find it underwhelming, but I still think it's good. I think it's serviceable. It does what it needs to do. It's not particularly great, but it's still enjoyable and wraps everything up relatively well. So I don't have that many complaints about it. Mainly just it could have been done better. Do really like that Tim Shaw came back as a bookend to the season. I don't know who they were trying to fool, though, with keeping his return a secret, because it was blatantly obvious that he was going to be coming back. And there were some really interesting concepts in here, too, mainly with the Ux, with these reality changers. And I did like seeing the conflict between Tim Shaw and the Doctor once they've met again. But, yeah, honestly, this finale isn't particularly special or memorable, but it's fine. Honestly, it's fine. It doesn't really do anything that I actively dislike, so I can't really hold that much against it. It's still my least favorite finale that I don't dislike, but it's fine. So I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. So now that I've discussed all the individual episodes, what did I think of the series as a whole? How does it come together? This series doesn't quite come together as well as past series because it doesn't have as much holding it together, i.e. there is no series arc, and there aren't really any returning elements aside from the odd throwaway line or something. Mainly the only thing keeping them together are the main characters being consistent between episodes. And I honestly don't mind that whatsoever. I think it's honestly a refreshing change. I wouldn't want it to stay this way forever, but for a series or two, I think it's great, honestly. And it's great to focus on individual adventures and not really worry about some overarching storyline. I don't think it's necessary whatsoever. I just think it's fun seeing the Doctor and her companions going on these individual adventures with something completely brand new and different every week. Now, as for the Doctor and the companions, I do like them all. I think all of them were good casting, although Tossin Cole is definitely the weakest actor of the bunch, and probably the weakest actor we've had as a companion, but he's still good, and I think he's definitely improved by the end of the season. Graham is just awesome. He's amazing. I'm really glad we have Graham. But, as I mentioned, I don't see the justification for 3 companions. I don't think it's an inherently bad idea, but I don't think they ever justified it. And you need to justify it if you have that many characters. So I just don't see the point of Yaz. I don't see why we need Yasmin. At least with Ryan, he has his relationship with Graham. But Yaz, she just doesn't really need to be there. So I just don't really see the point of it. They're all likable, but a lot of it's unnecessary. And as I've previously mentioned, I do agree with the majority that the guest writers are significantly better than Chris Chibnall himself, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, like, other than event episodes like the premiere or the finale, or where he's co-written with a guest writer, all of Chibnall's episodes are a 6 or lower. Whereas all the guest writers' episodes, there's not a single guest writer episode that's below a 7.5. So, yeah. I'm a defender of Chibnall, and I actually love him as showrunner. I love the decisions he's made about the general tone and feel of this season, about his era, and the direction he's taking the show. I love all that. But I definitely wouldn't complain if he took a step back from writing a little bit and maybe only wrote the key episodes and left the rest of the writing to all the guest writers and had more of a supervisory role, because I'm not quite so keen on him as head writer. I don't think he's bad, he's just definitely not as good as the other writers, which is a bit of a shame, but it is what it is. But yeah, honestly, I was actually kind of surprised because overall, my opinions really didn't change all that much on Series 11. It's stayed pretty much the same since it first aired. Only 3 episodes had a change in score. Those were Arachnids in the UK, which lost 1.5 points, and then Demons of the Punjab, which went up 0.5 point, and same with It Takes You Away, that also went up 0.5 point. But everything else had the same score. Like I mentioned, I feel like I appreciated most of the episodes at least a little bit more, even if the score didn't go up. But also, when you're looking at my series placement, the only thing that's changed is It Takes You Away has gone from 4th place up to 2nd. It used to be below The Woman Who Fell to Earth and Rosa, but now it's gone above those 2. Other than that, my ranking of the series episodes has stayed exactly the same, which is another thing I didn't expect. Mainly because with Series 10, there was a lot of shifting around, a lot of scores changed. But yeah, this time, not so much. My opinions have remained mostly consistent with how I first felt, and that is that Series 11 is a really enjoyable series. It's a lot of fun. It's not particularly memorable or special, but it's still good and far, far from bad. Way better than the worst series ever that people claim it to be. I just don't understand those sentiments towards it, because I still think it's a pretty good time overall. But yeah, I'm looking forward to Series 12 and what that's going to bring us. Hopeful that the flaws in Series 11 will be ironed out a bit more, and Series 12 will build on Series 11 and just be an improvement of that, because there's no doubt Series 11 did have a lot of flaws, but I still thought it was very enjoyable. And that's my final thoughts on Series 11. Please tell me what you guys think of Series 11 down in the comments below. And yeah, so Margaret Man 4, over and out. I'll see you guys later.